This happened in the early fall a few years ago. A few friends and I had planned a hike in the Boston Mountains, deep in the Ozark National Forest. We were staying near Jasper, and had heard about a lesser-known trailhead from a local at a gas station. He called it a scenic little climb with some real solitude, and he wasn't kidding. We started late, later than we should have. It was one of those golden October afternoons where the leaves were burning orange and red, and the air still carried the lingering breath of summer. My friends, Ben and Josh, were in far better shape than me. They kept surging ahead, eager to get to the top while I trudged behind, slower but steady. We didn't have cell service out there, so we agreed to meet at the overlook if we got separated. Somewhere along the switchbacks, I came to a fork in the trail. There were no signs or markers, no footprints, and I stood there for a moment, trying to remember if we had taken this split on a map earlier that morning. My friends had the paper map and I didn't even have GPS. I figured left looked slightly more worn down, so I followed it. Another mile or two in, and there was another fork. This time I went right. After a while I realized I hadn't seen or heard anyone in over an hour. No sign of my friends and no trail markers. It was just me alone in the woods. And then the quiet set in. Not the usual hush of a deep forest, but an unsettling kind of quiet. There were no insects, no birds. Even the wind seemed to stop moving through the trees. Just a dead, heavy stillness. I stopped walking and listened hard, but I couldn't hear anything. No twigs crackling in the underbrush, no distant hum of an engine. No signs of anything. That's when I noticed my water bladder was empty. Panic didn't hit all at once. It was more like a slow, creeping realization. I was alone in a part of the Ozarks I didn't know, with no map, no water, and no clear idea of which way was out. But I kept going, hoping with each bend it would bring some familiar landmark, a sound, a person. But each step only led me deeper into the ever-darkening forest. As the sun began to lower, my body started to crash. My thighs were cramping, my calves felt like they were wrapped in fire, and every step sent a jolt of pain up my spine. My head began to pound and I was soaked with sweat. Even though the evening air had cooled, I stopped to pee, and it came out syrupy color. I was dangerously dehydrated. But I kept walking. Eventually I stumbled down an old fire road, a gravel maintenance route that hadn't seen a truck in years. Relief washed over me, until I realized I had no idea which direction led to civilization. I turned right, praying to anything listening that it was the right call. The sun dipped below the ridgeline, and the woods swallowed the light. Within minutes, it was pitch dark, except for the glow of the sky behind the trees. My thoughts spiraled. I imagined lying down on the trail and just never getting up. I wondered if someone would find my body before the coyotes did. I kept whispering to myself, just keep going. One more mile. One more bend. And then I heard water. A creek trickled alongside the road. For a brief moment, I thought about drinking from it. My lips were cracked and stinging. My tongue felt like felt. But something told me not to. I remembered stories of people drinking stagnant creek water and ending up violently ill, which would only put me in an even worse situation. So I kept walking. The pain in my Achilles was unbearable. The skin had split from the constant rubbing of my shoe, and I could feel blood soaking into my socks. My thighs were raw, and my shoulders ached so badly I thought they might detach. I kept moving like a wind-up toy set on low power, just dragging forward through the darkness. And then I saw lights, not a flashlight, not a fire, but real lights, warm golden light filtering through the trees. I followed it, stumbling through the brush, and came out in front of an old, white-painted farmhouse that had been converted into a bed and breakfast. It looked like something out of a dream. Lace curtains, a wraparound porch, a hand-carved sign that read Dogwood Hollow Inn. I didn't even knock. I just walked up the steps. Before I could reach the door, a woman came out holding a camera and said, "Excuse me, could you take our picture?" I must have looked like death, mud-caked, bleeding, and probably ghostly pale, but the camera was already in my hands. I took 3 shaky pictures of her and her family on the lawn, and she smiled like there was nothing wrong. Then I stumbled into the lobby and found the bathroom. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. Blood, sweat, and grime. My lips were bright red like I'd eaten berries. I bent over the sink and drank from the tap like an animal. They ended up calling my friends and driving me to the ranger station the next morning. I never got a straight answer on which trail I took, or how I got so lost. Some of the rangers said they'd heard of hikers wandering off trails in those parts of the Ozarks, places where even the topographic maps don't always match the land. As I was waiting for the ranger to pick me up that morning, an older guy who stumbled in started a conversation with me, and alluded to the fact that when it gets real quiet, people can get lost and not found. That creeped me out something. I haven't hiked in the Ozarks since, and sincerely do not plan to. This happened a few years ago, around late February. I was 23, and my buddy Josiah and I had decided to do an overnight camping trip in the Ozarks, not far from the Mark Twain National Forest. It was that strange in-between season. Winter was still clinging on, but spring was whispering in the air. No leaves on the trees yet, but it had warmed up enough to hit about 60 degrees that afternoon, perfect for a bit of hiking and a little plinking. We hiked a few miles into this little plateau above a ridge, just west of Eminence, Missouri. We'd camped there before, and it always felt like a secluded and peaceful spot. We set up camp around 3 p.m., cracked open the bourbon and settled in. Just 2 friends, a .22 rifle, a roaring fire, and good conversation, the kind you can only really get when it's just you and your buddy, alone. We talked about college, relationships, and how the world seemed to be unraveling. Josiah, for all his backwards experience, wasn't exactly the most practical guy. He was loyal and had a good gut for danger, which would come in handy. At around 8 p.m., as we fed more kindling into the fire, we started to hear coyotes calling from the next ridge over. Totally normal out here. Missouri coyotes are loud, but usually timid. We figured they were just making their way down the ridge, maybe heading for the creek basin to hunt. But over the next hour, the howls didn't fade. Eventually, the woods went quiet. The fire popped and crackled, and I grabbed my flashlight and swept the tree line. That's when I saw a half circle of glowing yellow eyes reflecting in the beam back at us. There were at least 6 of them, maybe more. They weren't retreating, they were watching. Now, as you may know, coyotes generally don't attack people. But I tell you now, to have 6 pairs of eyes, and maybe more, staring at you in the darkness, basically surrounding you, knowing that they mostly don't attack humans, doesn't exactly fill you with a sense of ease. I was nearly crapping myself, and that's putting it lightly. Josh handed me the rifle and took the flashlight. I chambered around and kept it low. We stood back to back with the fire behind us, listening to the twigs snapping and breathing sharp. Every time Josiah lit up one of the coyotes, it would bark, then slip behind a tree, like it was a game to them. These weren't healthy coyotes. They were lean, and they had a look of something that's gotten desperate. We stood there for what felt like hours, frozen in place, rifle ready, flashlight scanning. Every few minutes they'd test the line, move a little closer, bark, retreat. They were sizing us up. They were starving, maybe they were sick. It was like they forgot to be afraid. Then as suddenly as it started, they were gone. They melted into the darkness of the woods, and we heard the howls pick up again across the next ridge. We didn't sleep much. I kept the rifle next to my sleeping bag and one eye open. Josiah said he kept dreaming he was being watched. Morning came, and then the real problem. A full-on snowstorm had rolled in overnight, temperatures had dropped into the teens, and there was about 3 inches already falling. Forecast hadn't mentioned anything like this. We skipped breakfast, tore down the camp in a flurry of numb hands and frostbitten fingertips, packed everything away in under an hour. Our trail was buried, and we were going to have to bushwhack out with a map and compass. Visibility was dropping fast. We identified a series of peaks and a creek we crossed the day before, plotted a course and headed out. Snow was deepening with every step. 2 hours in, we hit the creek. The bridge we crossed was miles out of the way. There was no time. We had to cross it here. Josiah went one way and I went the other, looking for a downed tree or anything that could be used. He found a narrow trunk stretching across the freezing water, barely 3 feet above. I crawled across, straddling it, and watched helplessly as my knife slipped out of my pocket into the icy water. Josiah came next, but he slipped in and dunked his foot. We found a rocky outcropping and tried to get his foot warm, got a dry pair of socks from my bag and got him moving again. But the foot was a ticking clock. We pushed the final few miles hard, snow almost 6 inches deep. When we finally saw my SUV through the trees, I nearly cried. We piled into the car, threw our gear into the back, and I cranked the heat. The sound of the engine coming to life was the most beautiful noise I'd heard in days. The drive back over the mountain was slow and careful, and when we reached my farmhouse just outside Birch Tree, we drank hot coffee, fried up eggs, and laughed until we cried. We knew we'd almost died out there twice. Camping in the Ozarks is beautiful, but it doesn't take much to turn a peaceful weekend into a survival situation. And I don't know what made those coyotes come for us that night, but I haven't camped without a loaded rifle since. This happened to me during my junior year of college. For context, I'm a 22-year-old female, and at the time I was driving back to school after a long weekend visiting my family near the Illinois-Indiana border. I was heading to the University of Arkansas, and I usually took the interstates through St. Louis down to Fayetteville. But on this particular trip, I made a last-minute decision to take the scenic route through the Ozarks. It was early March, and the weather had been decent until the forecast warned of a system rolling through central Missouri. I figured the winding back highways might be safer than the ice-slicked interstate shoulders. I also liked that these rural routes kept me alert. Speed limit changes, sharp curves, old country towns you'd blink and miss. I'd taken them before, and besides, the thought of wide open sky and scenery that wasn't just endless highway did something to please me. By the time I hit the Mark Twain National Forest area, it was well after dark. The roads were pitch dark, with no shoulder light, just dense forest, pressing up on either side of the 2-lane highway. Somewhere just south of Salem, Missouri, I had come to a complete stop. Flashing lights bounced across the trees ahead, red and white, cutting through the mist. A serious wreck up the road, maybe a logging truck, maybe a deer strike, hard to say. Emergency crews waved us through single file, and for about 10 minutes traffic crawled past the scene. I saw a crumpled SUV in a ditch, and an orange tarp stretched over something. Maybe someone didn't make it. I tried not to look for too long. As we got moving again, I noticed a truck behind me. Not a large semi, just an old boxy pickup with one working headlight. It had been behind me since the accident scene, but I didn't think much of it at first. People in the Ozarks drive pickups. That's not strange. What was strange was how close he stayed, like dangerously close. I tapped my brakes a few times to warn him off, but nothing. He rode my bumper through the curves, and when I straightened out on a stretch of road, he flicked on his brights and left them on, blinding me through my mirrors. I switched off my podcast and kept my eyes trained on the rear view. I was beginning to feel sick. There were no towns nearby, just trees and ditches and the occasional gravel road that disappeared into the dark. The truck wouldn't pass, wouldn't drop back. He kept flashing his brights and tailing me too close for comfort. I sped up and so did he. I slowed down, he slowed down too. For over half an hour I tried everything I could to shake him off. I took a random left onto a narrow gravel country road, something I would never do at night. The rain was coming harder now, and my tires slid a little on the loose rock, but I kept going. And a minute later, his truck headlights turned in behind me. That's when I knew this wasn't some impatient driver. This man was following me, and we were deep in the woods. I felt my chest tighten. Cell signal was almost non-existent out here, and I looked down. 1 bar, no data. The one time I needed GPS to call 911, I was alone on a forgotten road with nothing but dark trees and a stranger chasing me through the hills. I didn't cry, not yet. I just kept driving. I remembered that about 20 minutes ahead was a ranger station. It wasn't always manned, but it had floodlights and cameras. I kept my speed steady, trying not to fishtail on the wet gravel. The truck stayed close, lights flooding my cab. I swear I could hear him honking now, long, angry blasts that echoed through the woods. Finally, I saw the silhouette of the ranger station through the trees. I didn't stop. I just barreled into the gravel lot, slid sideways into a space near the building and grabbed my phone. There was still no signal, but the floodlights popped on as they were motion activated. And for a second I saw everything. The truck had stopped at the edge of the lot, just idling. I couldn't see the driver's face. His windows were too dark. But I could see the silhouette of a man who was just watching me. I had my phone in my hand and held it up like I was recording, hoping the cameras on the station were working. The truck sat there for maybe 15 seconds, engine rumbling. Then the guy flipped off his headlights, backed up, and drove off the way he'd come. There were no plates on the rear. I stayed at that station for nearly an hour, locked in my car with my hazard lights on. I didn't have the nerve to leave until a sheriff's cruiser showed up. I flagged him down and gave him a rundown of everything. He said I probably did the right thing, and I wasn't the first woman to report something similar along that stretch of road in the last few years. He told me they'd had issues lately, with a few remote properties being used for some unsavory purposes. He didn't go into detail, but he gave me an escort back to a main road and said if I ever see a vehicle trying to scare me like that again, do exactly what I did. Go somewhere with lights, cameras, and people, and don't go home until I was sure they had gone. I didn't sleep much that night, and I never took the route through the Ozarks again. The forest is beautiful, yeah, but out there between the hills and the hollows, some people take advantage of just how far away you are from help, and I don't want to be in that position again. This happened to me and my cousin a few years ago, deep in the Ozark backroads in Missouri. My cousin and I had just finished a late visit with friends in Western Plains and were driving north to pick up my brother from a buddy's place. It's only a couple of hours, but most of the route runs through narrow, unlit highways with no shoulder, steep drop-offs and dense woods. It was near 1 a.m. when we first noticed the car. We were coming up behind an old black Crown Vic, with no markings, no lights, nothing on the dash, just a boxy silhouette coasting well under the speed limit, doing maybe 45 in a 60. We figured it was a retired cop car or something, but the longer we trailed it, the weirder we felt. The thing looked completely blacked out, tinted windows, no visible plate, not even reflective tape. And it didn't make sense for something to be driving that slow through that stretch of Highway 63 unless they were lost or looking for something. It appeared to us that it looked like it needed to be stealthy, but they weren't being particularly so. We waited until a passing lane opened up. I hit the gas to get around them, and that's when he kept up speed. We tried to match him, push a little harder, 80, then 90, and he kept matching us. I glanced down and saw the speedometer creeping past 100. That was enough for me. I backed off and dropped down behind him again. We stayed like that for a while. A few miles of tight turns and blind hills, him coasting just slow enough to box us in. Then as the highway widened into 4 lanes near Licking, I gunned it down and finally got around him. For a few blissful minutes I thought it was the end of it, but then he pulled up behind us again, and he started turning off his headlights. Not flicking them or flashing, just full dark. For 30 seconds, a minute, then they'd come back on. Pitch black road, no shoulder, nowhere to pull off. The only reason I could even see he was still behind us was the silhouette of his car against the faint starlight. It was like being followed by a shadow. We stayed that way for miles with no other cars in sight. No houses, just winding forest and the occasional pasture fence swallowed in mist. I tried to convince myself it was just some psycho having fun or someone drunk, but something about it felt deliberate. Eventually we reached the gravel country road that led to my uncle's property. We had to slow down to turn off the highway, and I remember praying the Crown Vic would keep going straight, but he followed, right onto the gravel. My cousin called my brother, who was already outside waiting. He must have heard the panic in our voices because by the time we reached the house, he was standing in the driveway holding a shotgun. The Crown Vic stopped at the end of the drive, maybe 30 yards back, just idling. The driver then rolled down his window. I couldn't make out his face, but I saw the pale gleam of a grin. Not the kind of smile you give someone in passing. He sat like that for a second or two and pulled away. Never saw him again. I don't know what he wanted, but to the guy tailing us in the Black Vic, let's not meet again. In the deep folds of the Ozarks, where the forest presses close and heavy around the old dirt roads, there's a stretch of land in Douglas County that most people don't know even exists. No signage, no lights, no shoulder on the road. Just a narrow path winding through dense woodland. It's quiet out that way, and peaceful. My friend's parents had lived out that way for years, not quite off-grid, but near enough. Their place sat at the end of a dirt track, barely wide enough for a pickup, hidden behind a windbreaker of cedars and brush. With nothing around for miles, you don't end up there by accident. That day they'd gone into Ava for supplies, feed, groceries, mail. That day they'd gone into town for supplies, and were driving home as the late afternoon sun started falling behind the ridge. The road back to their place runs tight along a rise, one side dropping off into a hollow thick with undergrowth, the other pressed up against a wall of trees so dense you couldn't see more than a few feet in. About 5 miles from the house, they came around a bend and saw a pickup truck pulled over just beyond a little turnout where loggers used to park their rigs. It was a beat-to-hell F-150 primer grey with mismatched doors and a busted taillight. No plates. It would be fair to say this is the kind of vehicle you'd expect to find abandoned in the woods after a meth run. At first, it didn't register as anything unusual. People dump things out here all the time. But as they got closer, they saw the driver. He was out of the truck, standing near the edge of the trees with something heavy slung over his shoulder. My friend's father said the shape was all wrong for anything like deer. Too short, too wide, no limbs hanging down like a field-dressed buck. Just bulk. The guy had a tarpaul, maybe a blanket around it. He froze as their car rolled past and stood there staring at them. Dead still, eyes hard and unreadable. Not startled, just nervous and watching. They kept driving and didn't slow down or stop. Neither of them said anything at first, but both of them felt it. There was something wrong. That wasn't a poacher. That wasn't someone dumping roadkill, and whatever it was happening less than 5 miles from their home. So they drove in silence for another minute or two until the trees opened up enough for a signal, and they called the sheriff. It took everything they had not to look over their shoulders the entire way back. Every bend in the road felt like it could hide headlights. Every switchback might end up with that truck behind them, or worse, parked in their drive. Law enforcement showed up about 20 minutes later, but by then the guy had tried to disappear deeper into the woods. Fortunately, he wasn't quick enough. The deputies found him dragging what turned out to be a woman's body, partially wrapped in a blanket and already starting to stiffen. She'd been gone for a while. There was no ID and no obvious cause of death right away. They wouldn't give details, but my friend said her dad caught a glimpse as they loaded the body onto the coroner's van. The face had been smashed in by something hard. Turns out this man had a record. Assaults, possession, a missing persons report tied to a similar vehicle. He got locked up. See, out there, in a place like Douglas County, people don't forget things. The locals kept to themselves for a reason, and my friend's parents were one of maybe 3 families on that road, which meant if someone wanted to come looking for them, there'd be no one around to hear the knock at the door, no patrol cars rolling by, and no neighbors to call for help. They started keeping the dogs inside more often than that, purchased extra locks, left the porch light on all night, and installed floodlights on the corners of the house. But even then, the trees had swallowed the light. They considered moving, but where would they go? This was their home, and it still is. My friend says her dad doesn't go out after dark much now, not even to check the barn. He always carries a rifle, and he is genuinely afraid that if that guy ever gets released, he's going to come for vengeance for the people who reported him. Or maybe their family members are biding time, waiting from the instruction from prison that the person who ratted them out deserves some punishment. Retribution can come silently and unannounced, which is why they are so afraid. I'd just move, but they won't. I hope nothing bad happens to them. My boyfriend and I had made the long drive out to see my grandparents, who live tucked deep in the hills of rural Arkansas. The house sits near a top of a wooded slope, technically not a mountain, but close enough. It feels like it, especially when you're hauling groceries up their gravel driveway. Out there, the stars cut through the dark so sharp it feels almost unnatural. You can't hear traffic. What you can hear are owls, coyotes, and the wind. There's barely any cell reception. The closest Walmart is nearly 2 hours away, and if you break down out there, you'd better have packed water. We had planned to stay a few days, hiking, kayaking, just a little time away from everything. The first day was peaceful. You don't really realize how much your body appreciates it until after you've been there and truly experienced freedom. The second night is when things got strange. Earlier that day, my grandfather had casually mentioned a man he'd seen walking along the gravel road that winds past their property. He said he looked to be in his 30s. He was barefoot and shirtless, wandering the shoulder like he was lost or high. Apparently he'd never seen him before, which meant something considering the closest neighbors lived a half-mile apart, and everyone on this road knew everyone else. That night at around 8:30, which is well into bedtime hours around here, we were down in the basement playing cards. The house is built into the side of the slope, so the basement opens up into the lower part of the hill, and the front door is technically on the second level. It's quiet outside, with no wind, no frogs, just the buzz of a distant porch light. When we heard a knock at the door, my grandfather stood up, frowning. No one shows up unannounced around here, especially not after dark. We listened to his footsteps on the stairs, then heard him open the front door. A second passed. Then we heard him say loud and confused, "Didn't you just knock on my door?" Some low conversation followed. We couldn't hear the other voice, just the occasional murmur. Then my grandfather came back downstairs looking unsettled. He said it was a man, shirtless, barefoot, and scratched up. He looked like the same guy he'd seen earlier in the week. The man had introduced himself with his full name and said he was trying to get his life back on track. He claimed he was living with his mother in a house just up the hill. Said he was going around knocking on doors, which sounded harmless enough, until you realized there were no houses up the hill, not for several miles. My boyfriend and I gave each other a look. He made an offhand comment about how burglars sometimes knock to see who's home before robbing a place. A lot of people up here have vacation homes, places that sit empty for months at a time. If someone wanted to break in, they'd have all the privacy in the world. We went back to our card game, though the mood had shifted. The woods felt closer, and we kept looking towards the windows without realizing it. Maybe 20 minutes later, my grandmother looked up and met my eyes. "You hear talking?" she asked. I paused. I had. It was low and muffled, and I assumed it was the TV upstairs. She shook her head. The TV was off. Her voice was tight and uneasy, and she's not someone who scares easily. My boyfriend was already halfway to the door. My grandfather followed right behind him, pistol in hand, from who knows where. My grandmother and I went upstairs and checked the windows, but there was nothing. Just trees, darkness, and the sound of the wind stirring the leaves. The driveway was empty. They came back in a few minutes later, but nothing was out there. No sound, no sign of anyone. I felt a pit forming in my stomach and asked for the name the man had given my grandfather and Googled it. 2 missing person reports came up. One was from last summer. The man had gone missing with his girlfriend and her child. They had been found, he hadn't. Police believed he was hiding out after a high-speed chase in another part of the state. The second report was recent, filed by his mother a few weeks prior. She lived 4 hours away, not just up the hill. My grandfather called the sheriff. They found him less than an hour later, still shirtless and barefoot, sprinting through the woods, scratched up and rambling nonsense. I think it could have gone much worse. I grew up in southwest Missouri, not far from Joplin. And if you're from around there, you've probably heard of the Joplin Spooklights. It's one of those old local legends that just always existed, with no real explanation and no real proof. Just this dancing light that shows up on the same stretch of road generation after generation. It's still there, apparently. And I've seen it. I was a teenager the first time I went looking for it. This was back when we were sneaking out after curfew and doing stupid things in hopes of feeling like adults. My boyfriend at the time took me out to the usual spot, a long, lonely stretch of gravel out near the border. We parked the car to wait and see the light. For a good hour we just sat there listening to the radio, steamed up windows, making out teenager stuff, you know. Honestly, we're about to call it a bust, when he suddenly leaned forward and pointed through the windshield. "Hey, what's that?" In the distance we saw it, a pale blue-green light, bobbing along the horizon, way down the road. It shimmered and pulsed. It didn't make a sound. It moved slowly at first, like someone walking with a lantern, and then it began to drift closer. We both froze, just watching it, waiting to see what it would do. And then it rushed at us. I swear to you, the damn thing came flying down the road, silent and fast, and, in a split second, it zipped over the hood of the car, across the windshield, and right over the roof, in a flash of greenish-blue light. The whole car lit up. I remember my boyfriend practically flattening himself against the seat, like he thought he might crash through the glass. "Well, that's enough of that," he said, putting the car into drive. We peeled out of there fast, gravel flying. I don't know what it was, and still don't. Ball lightning, maybe, but I don't think so. Nothing about it felt natural. It felt intelligent. A few years later in college, I started volunteering at Wilson Creek National Battlefield just outside of Springfield. It's beautiful land, rolling fields, thick tree lines, wild flowers in the summer. There's history there. The Ray House sits on the land, this big, bright, white house that was used as a field hospital. It should feel airy and welcoming, but it doesn't. It always felt dim and unnaturally still inside. I used to hear stories from other volunteers about a woman in white seen walking the fields or people hearing cannon fire on still silent nights. Some said you could still hear men shouting, calling orders, or crying for help just before dawn. When I was alone closing up, I thought I heard someone whispering my name from the top of the stairs. I called out and checked, but then there was no one there. I didn't finish sweeping. I just left. My son had his own brush with something strange not long ago. He and his girlfriend drove out to Crybaby Holler, one of those classic ghost child locations every area seems to have. According to local legend, if you park on the little bridge and wait, you'll hear a baby crying. Some say it's a drowned child, others say it's one whose life was taken from them. Either way, the legend ends with something hitting your car, and that's exactly what happened. They parked on the bridge, the windows fogged. They sat in the dark, waiting, half laughing but mostly bored, until they heard a faint but unmistakable cry. Then bang! Something hit the back of the car. They peeled out, terrified, and when they got home, there were handprints, tiny handprints on the trunk. They swore the car had been clean before they left. And then there's Albino Farm. If you know, you know. North of Springfield, tucked back in the woods, it was rumored to be haunted, cursed, and home to devil worshippers, depending on which friend was telling you the story, of course. We went there often after church on summer nights, trying to spook each other, drinking cheap booze or smoking menthols, and pretending we weren't afraid. Mostly it was just us being dumb teenagers, except for one night. There were maybe 5 of us, no drinking, just sitting around a weak little campfire talking. The woods were deep and dark, but we weren't worried until we started hearing it. A crack in the woods, then another, heavier than a branch falling and footsteps slow and measured. Maybe someone's climbing, someone said. Maybe they've got beer. But we didn't see anyone. The sound kept coming closer and deliberate. Then silence. It was oppressive silence, like the wood was holding its breath. One of the guys stood up and shouted into the woods, "Is anyone there?" But there was nothing. Not a bird, not an insect, no reply. Someone started crying. I can't remember who, but I didn't blame them. We left fast. We came back weeks later with flashlights and stupidly a firearm, but never found any signs of anyone living out there. The trail was overgrown, the clearing was cold and empty, and the weirdest part, the fire pit we'd built was gone, stones and all. I don't know what it is about this part of the country. The Ozarks are wild and beautiful, yes, but there's something else here. You can feel it on foggy roads and hollow trails and still battlefields. This happened about 10 years ago, near Gainesville, Missouri, deep in the heart of the Ozark Mountains. My mum had taken me and my little sister to visit her cousin, who owned a parcel of land just east of town, tucked back in the dense forest off a gravel country road. It wasn't truly remote in a wilderness survival sense, but it sure felt like it. Neighbors were scattered miles apart, cell signal came and went, and the land was wild, cluttered with cedar and oak, and rigid like a folded map. We stayed in a faded blue camper, parked beside an old barn. My cousin raised goats and kept a couple of trail horses, and during the day we'd help her feed or clean up. But I was 17 and itching for freedom. So on the second afternoon I decided to ride her four-wheeler up one of the horse trails to explore. She warned me, "Don't take the left fork past the old water tower. It's overgrown and washes out easy." So naturally I took it. The trail started narrow and rustled but passable. I rode about 40 minutes straight, weaving around boulders and low-hanging branches, enjoying the dips and climbs. The forest was thick, breathing around me, birds chirping, wind moving, the leaves like whispers, insects buzzing. It was peaceful. And then everything stopped. The wind, the bugs, the bird chatter, the drone of the four-wheeler, and the sound of my own breath. The air had a strange weight to it, pressed in. I remember thinking something was watching me, and the woods looked exactly the same, and that's when I saw it. A massive deer. Or at least something that looked like one, standing perfectly still about 40 feet up the trail, tall as a horse, antlers that looked wrong, tangled. Its body looked odd, bulky, but still, it wasn't breathing. The eyes were the worst part, not glowing, not glassy, just black voids that didn't reflect the light at all, like holes punched into its skull. I stared, and it stared back. I had the distinct sensation that it wasn't trying to harm me, more so that I wasn't supposed to be there. That much was clear. The silence pressed in hard, and my hands went cold on the handlebars. The air around me felt like static, and the wind stirred through the trees with a sudden gust. And I swear I heard words, not English, not human. I twisted the throttle and whipped the four-wheeler around. There wasn't a proper clearing, and I damn near rolled it trying to do a half-moon in the trail. I clipped a root, and my back tire spun out, but I got control and gunned it. As I flew back down the trail, I started seeing animals. Deers again, a fox, maybe a bobcat, and once a massive, barred owl, perched on a limb, all silent and watching, their eyes following me. It was like I was driving through a living corridor of judgment. The only sound was my engine roaring in a world that had gone too quiet. I was panting, heart hammering. I kept expecting something to step out of the trail or to attack me, but nothing ever did. Eventually, I started recognizing the terrain again. I saw the rusted-out water tower through the trees and knew I was close. I started seeing tracks again, my own from earlier, but they were faint, almost erased. I hit the gas and finally tore out of the trailhead onto the gravel road, skidding into the sunlight and dust. I didn't see the deer thing again. But a few 100 feet up the road, I passed an old man in a beat-up pickup, idling by the fence line. He watched me roll by. He didn't wave, just stared. There was something in the way he looked at me, like he knew where I'd been. I didn't tell my cousin right away. It felt too weird. When I told her, she didn't act surprised and said that she told me not to go down that fork. I've never gone back there since. I've had dreams about the creature, mostly in moments of stress. It's always watching, it never attacks. Call it what you want, a cryptid, a spirit, a guardian of the land. But if you find yourself alone on a back trail in the Ozarks and everything goes quiet, don't keep going in that direction. Turn around and run, for your own sake. This happened about 4 years ago. Me and a few friends from college in southern Missouri got hooked on ghost stories and local legends. One night we decided to chase some real Ozark hauntings and do a little investigation for fun. After some quick research, 2 places kept popping up. A particular stretch called Devil Hollows Road and an old bridge nearby with a grim past. Devil's Hollow Road is a narrow gravel lane about 2 miles long, winding through thick wood and tall brush, right near the bend of Elvins Point River.